At 3:47 a.m., the town sirens began to scream. It wasn't the long rolling wail that signaled a fire or the sharp chirp of a missing child. This was a steady, brutal pulse, urgent, mechanical, inhuman. The kind of sound that tells you something is already too late. In the center of town, Nurse Elise Hanley sat upright in bed, heart already hammering, long before she understood why. She threw the sheets back, feet finding the cold floor, and grabbed her phone. No signal. The silence outside was wrong. Thick. The air pressed like a soaked towel against the glass. From her upstairs window, she couldn't see the street, only water. It moved fast, black and reflective, licking the porch rail and swallowing the steps she'd climbed every day for 13 years. She turned to the other side of the bed. Empty, as always. Chris hadn't come home in 6 days. She told everyone he was working out of state. She even called in a favor at the clinic to fake a referral. But the truth was, she didn't know. His truck was gone. His tools were gone. And his name still lingered in her mouth, like a lie she didn't mean to tell. Now, standing in pajama pants and a faded t-shirt with Caldwell Flood Relief 2012 peeling across the chest, she realized it was happening again. Only this time there'd been no warning. Elise grabbed the emergency bag from the hall closet, the one she'd packed years ago and forgotten until now. Flashlight, batteries, 2 cans of peaches, a photo album wrapped in plastic. She paused, staring at the doorway to the downstairs guest room. Then she heard the thud. A heavy, wet noise like something striking the house from outside. Or from inside. She froze. Then a voice, faint, muffled, male. Help! She turned toward the stairs, but the bottom 4 steps were already underwater. Elise. Her name this time. Familiar. Raw. She didn't think. She moved. In 3 steps, she was at the landing, flipping the breaker to cut power, grabbing the headlamp from the wall hook, then leaping the stairwell with her heart in her throat. The water was cold, colder than it should have been. In the guest room, the door shuddered in its frame. Elise. She flung it open. And there, waist deep in the rising flood, was her husband, Chris, alive, bleeding, and chained to the radiator. Elise, please, don't freak out. Chris's voice was hoarse, jaw clenched against the shock of cold water, creeping higher against his ribs. The chain around his left ankle clinked as he shifted, pulling tight against the radiator's rusted leg. His shirt was soaked and torn, his eyes wild. What the hell is going on? She demanded, stepping into the water, flashlight beams slicing across the room. Why are you here? Why are you chained? I was going to explain. I didn't think the water would get this high, not this fast. Her stomach flipped. The sirens outside still pulsed. The water was rising by the minute. You've been gone for a week, she hissed. People asked me if I'd heard from you. I lied for you. And you've been here? Chris winced. It's not what you think. Then tell me what it is. He looked down. The chain was looped twice around the radiator pipe and padlocked. The key wasn't visible. Elise swore under her breath and yanked a drawer open, then another. Wet clothes floated around her knees, tangling her legs. Elise, please, listen. I am listening. Start talking. I was hiding, he said quietly. From someone. I couldn't go to the cops. I couldn't leave. So I locked myself in. Who the hell are you hiding from? Chris hesitated. Then, the boy. I thought he'd be gone by now. What boy? The one who showed up 2 nights after I left. Elise stopped searching. Her fingers tightened on the flashlight. You're not making sense. He broke into the garage, then the basement. I don't know what he wanted, but he's not just some runaway, Elise. He knew things about us, about you, about my work. I thought he was watching the house. Watching? What? Like a stalker? I think he's the reason I got fired, Chris said flatly. I think he planted something in my truck. Elise, I was set up. Outside, thunder rolled. The storm wasn't over. It was just getting started. You're telling me, she said slowly, that some kid is behind all of this? And instead of calling me or the police, you chained yourself to a pipe and hid in my guest room. I didn't want you involved. You're my husband, in case you forgot. He didn't answer. The water reached her thighs. Elise, Chris said, softer now. You have to get out of here. If he's still around, if he sees the water, he might come back. Duh. She stared at him. How do you even know he's real? Chris didn't blink. Because before I locked myself in, he left a message. Elise stepped back. What kind of message? Chris nodded toward the small cabinet under the guest room sink. She opened it. Inside was a waterlogged notebook. On the first page, written in thick black ink, truth floats, lies drown. And underneath, one more line, shakier, but clearly meant for her. Ask Chris what he did on Maple Street. Elise felt her breath go shallow. Because Maple Street, that was where the clinic used to be. Where the overdose happened. Where the girl died. And Chris had never told her he was on shift that night. Elise dragged a stool from the hallway and placed it in the water next to Chris, her flashlight balanced on a shelf to keep both hands free. His ankle was raw where the chain had rubbed, the padlock already rusting in the rising flood. She cleaned the cut with a damp towel, biting back the 100 things she wanted to scream. You chained yourself to a radiator, Chris. That's not hiding. That's punishing yourself. He looked away. I had to. You had to. I didn't trust myself. To stay. To leave. To face you in. She sat back on her heels, wet through, freezing. You didn't think to call me? To say, hey Elise, I'm spiraling and maybe being stalked by some cryptic teenager. Please bring bolt cutters and pie? I didn't want to drag you down with me. Oh, thanks. That worked out great. Chris exhaled through his nose, jaw clenched. You weren't supposed to be home. I thought you were still on night shifts. I figured I'd be out before the weekend. But you weren't. No. He swallowed. Because the kid came back. Elise stared at him. You're serious? I heard him. Footsteps. In the garage. Then in the basement. He left that notebook. I thought, maybe if I hid long enough he'd leave. You hid in our house. For 6 days. While I slept upstairs. He gave a short, bitter laugh. That's the thing about shame. It makes a man real good at being invisible. Elise didn't answer. She stood and examined the chain. The padlock was standard. She could cut it if she still had the bolt cutters in the garden shed. which might already be underwater. "Hold tight," she muttered. "I'll see if anything's still above the waterline." As she moved toward the stairs, her flashlight flickered. Then something creaked. Not the house, but the front door. "Elise," Chris said quietly. She turned. Water was now nearly to his waist. The current tugged faintly around their knees. He pointed behind her. "Someone's here." A shadow moved past the glass of the side window. She grabbed the flashlight, heart pounding, and crept up the stairs, each step echoing louder than it should. On the second floor, the water was only a memory, but her skin was ice. She reached the bedroom, yanked open the drawer in the nightstand, and retrieved the heavy flashlight with the steel base. When she turned, a figure stood in the hallway. Not soaked. Not armed. Just still. A boy, maybe 17, messy hair, raincoat open. He held the notebook in one hand like a messenger who'd arrived too late. "Chris lied," he said. His voice was low, steady. Elise tightened her grip on the flashlight. The boy tilted his head. "You think he's the victim." She didn't speak. "He never told you what happened to Mia Rivera. But he was there. And so was I." "Mia's death was an overdose," she said. "It was ruled accidental." "I know," the boy replied, "because I saw the report." And before she could ask what that meant, he turned and vanished into the water-soaked dark. Elise didn't sleep. Not that night. Not with her husband chained to a radiator and a soaked teenager slipping through her hallway like a ghost with receipts. She sat at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a cold mug, rain still drumming against the windows. The water had receded from the lower stairs, but the first floor was ruined furniture, floating like forgotten promises. Chris was upstairs now. She'd cut the chain with the bolt cutters she found in the shed, just above the floodline, and wrapped his ankle with gauze. They hadn't spoken since. Not really. Every question she wanted to ask came with two more she wasn't ready to hear the answers to. At sunrise, she went to the attic. It took 20 minutes to find the box. Clinic files. 2017, written in faded red marker. Her hands trembled as she flipped through folders, her breath hitching at every familiar name. Broken wrists, diabetes, hospice cases. Then she found it. Rivera Mia, age 19. Admitted 5:42 p.m., expired 6:08 p.m. She opened the folder. 2 pages, 1 form, 1 incident report. But there should have been 3. The clinic protocol always included a final observation log signed by the shift supervisor. Her heart raced. The signature line was blank, no timestamp, no attending nurse noted. Only one comment was handwritten in the margin, in thick, clumsy ink. Patient unresponsive. No naloxone administered. No naloxone. She remembered that night now vaguely. The girl had come in convulsing. Elise wasn't on shift, but she'd passed by after a double at the pharmacy counter, too tired to think. Chris was supposed to be in the supply room, but he had never mentioned seeing Mia. And the only other person on duty had died last year in a car wreck. Her pulse thundered. She closed the folder slowly. Every part of her wanted to believe this was just a clerical error, just messy records from an overwhelmed system. But then she remembered the boy's face, the certainty in his voice. She took the folder downstairs. Chris sat on the couch, head down, holding a towel against his bandaged leg. The lights flickered. They still didn't have power. She tossed the file onto the table. You didn't file the final log. Chris didn't look at her. Tell me, she said. What happened that night? I don't remember, he whispered. That's not good enough. He stopped, breathing shallow. I was high. The silence stretched long and tight. I thought she'd be okay. I thought she just needed to sleep it off. I didn't check her vitals. I was in the back, Elise. I didn't even know she'd been admitted. But you were the shift lead. He nodded, barely. And you signed off the discharge. He didn't answer. Why didn't you tell me? Chris looked up, eyes bloodshot. Because I thought I could live with it. And now? He swallowed. Now I don't think I deserve to. There was a knock at the back door. Slow, deliberate. Elise stood. Through the foggy pane, she saw a figure in a raincoat. The boy? He held something in his hand. Another folder. Elise unlocked the back door without a word. The boy stepped inside, dripping rain onto the warped linoleum. He wore the same soaked raincoat, the same blank expression, but now held a slim plastic folder under one arm, sealed in a zip bag. He didn't speak right away. Neither did she. Chris upstairs hadn't moved. Elise knew because she hadn't told him the boy was back. The boy set the folder on the kitchen table and pulled out a single sheet of paper. I thought you should see the one they never filed, he said. Elise hesitated. Then, how did you get this? I used to live 2 blocks from Maple Street. My mom was in and out of that clinic before it shut down. His voice was even. The day they closed, everyone scrambled. Boxes left in the open. Garbage bags full of files dumped behind the building. No one was watching. Elise swallowed. So you took this? I took a lot. Most of it meant nothing. But this. He tapped the page. This wasn't just a mistake. Elise opened the folder. Inside was a copy of the shift log from Mia Rivera's death. This one had the missing page, observation notes, timeline, and a name scrawled at the bottom in shaky ink. C. Hanley, Chris's signature. Her husband had been there. On duty, and according to this sheet, he had written that naloxone was not available. Elise felt the blood leave her hands. That's not true. We had 5 vials stocked that week. The boy nodded. Exactly. She sank into the nearest chair. So you're saying he lied on the report to cover it up? I think so, the boy said. But not just for himself. He reached into his coat and pulled out a second paper. A list of names. Staff, patients, delivery logs. And there, next to one of the purchase orders for narcotics, was a falsified signature. H. McClellan. Elise's former supervisor, the one who died in a car wreck. Only, she remembered now, H. McClellan never signed supply orders. Chris did. Elise looked up, throat dry. You think he was stealing? The boy didn't answer. He didn't have to. Rain tapped harder against the windows. The wind moaned low and long, rattling the gutter. Who are you? Elise asked finally. The boy stared at her. Someone who watched his sister die in a hallway while no one checked her pulse. And then, for the first time, his voice broke. She was 17. Elise's knuckles whitened around the folder. She stared at the birth date on Mia's intake form, February 2nd, 1998, and did the math again, as if willing it to change. The report listed her as 19, but something about it felt off. Too clean, too convenient. She was 17, the boy said quietly, watching her. Turned 17 just 2 weeks before she died. Elise looked up. But the file, they changed it. Who did? The shift lead, whoever signed the incident report. That's why the logs were missing in your attic, because someone removed them before the clinic shut down. But why? The boy stepped closer, dripping water from his sleeves. His voice had gone flat again. If she'd been listed as a minor, there would have been an investigation, interviews, state-level review, autopsy procedures. But 19? Just another adult overdose. No extra paperwork, no spotlight. Elise's mouth was dry. Chris said he didn't know she'd been admitted. The boy met her eyes. Maybe he didn't at first, but he signed off the inventory report that night. He knew the naloxone was there. He lied about it being out of stock. Elise flipped back to the second page. The falsified line stood out now, like blood on snow. No naloxone available at time of admission. But there was a delivery log from that same morning. 5 doses recorded, signed for by Chris. She gripped the edge of the table. Why would he do that? I don't know, the boy said. But I think Mia walked in on something, and he thought letting her die would keep it buried. A sick, dizzying silence hung between them. Who are you? She asked again. He pulled out a laminated school ID from his back pocket and set it on the table. Gabriel Rivera, Senior, Caldwell High. My sister, he said, was the only family I had left, and your husband let her drown long before the flood started. Elise's heart thundered. A crash upstairs made her flinch the sound of something tipping, then footsteps on soaked carpet. Chris, Gabriel's voice dropped. You want justice, or do you still want your marriage? Elise didn't answer, because the truth was, she didn't know. Chris stood at the top of the stairs, his face pale, eyes shadowed. He held the hallway wall with one hand like the house might shift beneath him. He'd heard everything. Gabriel didn't flinch, didn't even turn. You really want to keep pretending? He asked over his shoulder. Chris didn't answer. Elise looked between them, her husband and the boy, whose life had been cracked in half by a falsified line on a form. You drugged up, lied in a death report, and chained yourself in my house? She said quietly. That's your legacy now. Chris stepped down slowly. It wasn't meant to go that far. Then how far was it meant to go? His voice was barely audible. She was supposed to walk out, like the others. You've done this before? Elise's stomach turned. No, he winced. Not like that. But I took the meds, a few at first, then more. I sold some, covered for it in inventory. When I realized she saw the clipboard, I panicked, told her to leave. She passed out before she got to the door. You could have saved her. Chris nodded once. I know. Gabriel still didn't look back. And so you lied, changed her age, and hoped the building would bury it. Chris stared at the floor. It nearly did. But now the water's rising, Gabriel said. And it was. Outside, the wind screamed. A downed power line sparked across the flooded street, flashes of white slicing through the gray. Somewhere nearby, a tree cracked and fell with a bone-snapping crunch. Elise pulled herself together. We need to leave. Now. Gabriel turned. There's a boat behind the fire station. I passed it on the way in. Small, but enough for 3. Chris limped to the table, placing a hand on the folder. You're not calling the cops? Elise stared at him. Not yet. He blinked. Why not? Because if you go to jail right now, Gabriel gets nothing. No closure, no proof, no confession. She opened the hall closet and pulled down a small metal lockbox from the top shelf. Chris's lockbox, one she'd ignored for years. Key was on his keyring. She opened it. Inside, prescription pads, empty vials, 2 burner phones, and a USB stick labeled Shift Logs Backups. Gabriel leaned in. Is that? Everything, Elise said. She turned to Chris. If you ever loved me, you will come with us, get in that boat, and hand this over in front of someone who can make it count. Chris didn't argue. Not anymore. They reached the street by wading waist deep through black water, laced with oil and floating debris. Street signs peaked above the current, like half-drowned warnings. The air stank of gasoline and river rot. Gabriel led the way, light-footed and silent, his school bag now slung over one shoulder, with the USB stick zipped inside. Elise followed close, holding the lockbox in one hand, the other gripping the back of Chris's soaked jacket. The fire station was barely visible through the downpour, but the rescue boat was still there, an aluminum skiff tied to a railing, the rope tugging with the current. The outboard motor looked ancient, but intact. Keys are here, Gabriel called, pulling them from a hook mounted near the station door. Manual choke, I can drive it. Are you even old enough to drive a boat? Elise asked without thinking. Gabriel looked over his shoulder, rain streaming down his face. I buried my sister when I was 15. I'm old enough for anything. No one argued. They climbed aboard, Gabriel at the stern. Elise sat in the middle, still clutching the box. Chris settled at the front, his eyes scanning the dark water like it might rise up and claim him. The motor sputtered, choked, then growled to life. The skiff pushed off. Caldwell. Texas faded behind them, or rather, beneath them, rooftops poking through the flood like sunken gravestones. Elise couldn't stop staring. Her clinic, the diner where she and Chris had once met, the corner where Mia had been found, all blurred into the gray. She thought of the notebook Gabriel had brought, the line that had haunted her since she first saw it. Truth floats, lies drown. She finally understood. The boat veered south, toward the temporary shelter set up on the high school football field. People in ponchos stood knee-deep in mud, waving flashlights, signaling survivors. As they pulled up to the dock, a woman in a rain jacket stepped forward. Her badge glinted in the floodlights. Sheriff's Department. Names? She asked. Elise stood. I'm Elise Hanley, nurse. This is Gabriel Rivera, and this is Chris Hanley. Chris blinked, but didn't object. Elise handed over the lockbox and the USB. This contains evidence related to the death of Mia Rivera. My husband has a statement to give. The deputy paused, her expression unreadable. Then, let's get you inside. As Gabriel stepped off the boat, his foot slipped in the mud. Elise reached to steady him. He caught her arm and held it for just a moment, not for balance, but for something more human. You didn't have to do this, he whispered. I did, she said, because someone should have back then. 3 months later, the water was gone, but the town still smelled like mildew and memory. Caldwell's main street was lined with scaffolding and promise. Windows repaired, roofs patched, and a new coat of paint on the old diner where Marla once served a lemon pie and gossip by the slice. But the flood had left more than mud. It had uncovered things no one had wanted to talk about. Mia Rivera's case was reopened. Her name, once buried at the bottom of a generic overdose file, now sat on a petition with over 5,000 signatures. A new investigation led to the indictment of 3 former clinic employees, Chris included, and exposed a quiet trail of falsified prescriptions and hidden deaths stretching back nearly 2 years. The town didn't speak his name anymore. Elise kept working. She transferred to the hospital in the next county, took night shifts, and moved into a small duplex closer to dry ground. The old house was sold to a couple from Austin who didn't ask why the foundation was reinforced or why the guest room floor was newly replaced. Gabriel came by once. He didn't stay long. He brought a sealed envelope with a newspaper clipping inside. State orders audit of 19 small-town clinics after Caldwell exposure. And a sticky note. Thank you for not looking away. Gee, Elise kept it tucked in the back of her wallet. Sometimes when the power flickered, or the rain came too hard too fast, she'd walk to the edge of town, to where the water once crept over porches and into lives. She never brought anyone with her. She just stood there and remembered the night everything sank, so the truth could finally rise. Sometimes the storm reveals more than it destroys. Which moment in this story struck you the most? And what would you have done if you were Elise, standing between truth and loyalty? Tell us in the comments. We read them all.